1990 had been a killer year for me as a kid. My mother got a new job, we moved into a new home, I got my very first job, and finally, I would get a Turbografx 16 of my very own. The Turbo had been released in August of 1989 with a handful of games, but by the time I got mine in 1990, that number had increased quite a bit and included some really nice titles. Thanks to a few side hustles and a new job, I was able to buy a couple of those and rent the rest, making the Turbo a great addition to my Sega Genesis. In this episode, we are going to take a look at the Turbografx 16 games that were released in 1989, talk a bit about their quality, and try and find out just what the hell went so wrong and why it failed so miserably in North America. I hope you guys enjoy the early days of the Turbografx 16. The first game that many people played for the Turbo was the Packin, Keith Courage and Alpha Zones. At first you probably thought, what the heck is this cutesy mess? But once you got past the super weak sections, it turned into a fast, cool looking robot action game where you cut down your enemies to some pretty epic music. I liked it and didn't mind it as a Packin at all. I know many of you don't care for digital pinball games, but Alien Crush here was a good one. It had unique graphics and a pretty decent soundtrack. Back when most pinball games were simple looking, this gave off a heck of an impression with the Aliens vibe. Not super exciting, but still a fun one to play for a few minutes here and there. The Legendary Axe was an early favorite of mine. It was an action platformer that was really difficult, but once you got some time in, it was well worth the effort. I loved pretty much everything about it. The color was unreal, the music memorable, and I invested some serious time into it to get good. It had a cool power-up system where you needed to wait for your gauge to fill up for the most powerful hits. It made the gameplay more tactical than your normal hack and slash. I love this one even now and play it every so often just to remember how great this console could be. Victory Run wasn't a bad racing game at all, but next to the likes of OutRun, it definitely wasn't as exciting. It did have a system where you needed to replace parts on your car as they wore out, which was unheard of at the time, and I really liked the colorful graphics. Gameplay is a bit on the choppy side, but I still think it holds up well overall. Blazing Lasers was a straight up winner. It was a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up with a wicked weapon system. It also showed off the console's graphics, sound, and processing power. I mean, this is one good looking, sounding, and playing shooter, and it was easily a match for the better games in the genre. The only real bad thing I can say about it is that it lacked a 2-player mode, but it was so good otherwise, who the hell cared? I really enjoyed my time with China Warrior. Lots of people hated it, but I felt right at home with its large characters. It felt like an arcade game. You just didn't see that much on the screen back then very often. It's a simple game though, so I can see why many didn't stick with it. For what it was, I didn't mind it, and it really showed off that the Turbo was far more than a simple 8-bit console. Dungeon Explorer was developed by Atlas and was sort of their take on Gauntlet. You had multiplayer-based dungeon exploration, RPG elements, and bad guys to slaughter. There are better games in the genre today, but this still has some charm to its simple premise and presentation. If you saw RType running back then, you just had to appreciate how close it was to the arcade. I remember when my best bud Tyreek got it, he went crazy telling me how it was the best looking game he had ever seen. This one was split across 2 releases in Japan, but luckily the US version came on 1 card and the complete game. It still holds up today, though that sprite flicker can get a bit crazy in some areas. There are 2 kinds of people in this world, those that like Vigilante and those that don't. It's very similar to Irem's other brawler, Kung Fu Master, though the stories aren't connected. Your girl Madonna has been taken and you must get her back. Graphics here aren't bad, nor is the gameplay. But man, can it be frustrating. The enemies take crazy amounts of life, and the hitboxes can be really unfair. It leads to some irritating deaths and a ton of do-overs. It's fun if you can stomach that, if not, you'll quickly relegate this one to your most hated list. Dragon Spirit can be a fun vertically scrolling shoot 'em up, but man is it tough. Really tough. I have had all kinds of problems getting anywhere in this nowadays. I never feel like the weapons are powerful enough to deal with everything on the screen. A bit of practice alleviates some of that, but it's still a tough one to do well in. The Turbo did capture the feel of the arcade version quite well. It was so odd to see a Sega game on a system the Genesis was in direct competition with. It was kinda like seeing those Tengen games on the NES back then. I have to hand it to the developer though, they did a really good job here with Fantasy Zone. Graphics and sound are slightly different but faithful, and the game plays as well as it always had. If you enjoyed the arcade, this was a winner and a real showpiece for the color this system was capable of displaying. Galaga 90 is special. I couldn't get my father to play much, but he really enjoyed this one. It was everything that was great about Galaga, but with added scrolling stages, new enemies, fun music, and a hook that really made you want to play it again and again. Good times with this one. Give it a go if you like shooters, but you'll likely enjoy it either way. Moto Rotor is an overhead racing game with a terrible catch-up mechanic that destroys the gameplay and cripples the fun factor. Slow, boring, and just plain weak, I was shocked at how bad this game was when so many other Turbo games were so well made. I wanted my $3 back after I rented it. What an incredible waste of time. I'm a sucker for golf games, and Power Golf is a solid entry. It was one of the first games available for the Turbo, and while it has nothing on the likes of Neo Turf Masters, I can still play this one every so often. The graphics and sound won't impress you, but you'll come back for the decent gameplay. Capcom developed a horizontal shoot-'em-up called Hyperdyne Sidearms, which was ported to the Turbo mostly intact. It looks nice and has some rather challenging gameplay. Of the two main action buttons on the controller, one shoots left and one shoots right. You need to stop the game to switch weapons though, which really stinks, but you do get used to it. There's much better versions of this one out there today, but this one still ain't half bad. When it came to mainstream sports, Sega had the market virtually locked up. World-class baseball came along, and while not a broken game, it doesn't really do much to get your attention. The visuals are kinda plain and uninspired, and the AI can actually be quite bad. I have seen the computer try and throw out a base runner literally 10 times in a row before throwing a pitch. Not a great way to keep you coming back. I do like the detail on the ball when it's hit high, but this one is not gonna have you coming back again and again. World Court Tennis has to be one of my most hated games on the Turbo, yet I find myself coming back again and again trying to get better. It's a super simple tennis game at its heart, featuring up to 4 players at once. It also has an RPG minigame built in where you must defeat the evil tennis king. Playing against the AI gets you money, and you need to upgrade your equipment. It's an odd addition that the developer Namco would use in Final Lap Twin as well. I suck at this game though. I lose way more than I win. This tennis game just isn't for me. The Turbografx 16 also became the first home console to use CD-ROM technology for games. At the very end of 1989, NEC dropped the Turbo CD in North America for a whopping $400. Just 2 games launched with it, and man did I want one. The price was just too much at the time, and I'd need to wait a while before I could afford to try out CD gaming. Of the 2 games that came out with the attachment, they both were actually pretty good. Fighting Street was a port of Capcom's original Street Fighter. The 2-button controller hampered the gameplay a bit, but it was still really cool to see this game at home. Street Fighter 2 quickly relegated it to the forgotten pile, but I still play it sometimes for a good laugh. Monster Lair was the second game in a port of the arcade game Wonder Boy 3. You Sega fans should be well aware of this one. The Turbo CD did a killer port here, and it looks and sounds spectacular, giving the arcade version a run for its money. Frankly, it's the best version of this game in my view. Its only weakness is the lack of multi-layered backgrounds. So there is 1989 in a nutshell for the Turbografx 16. While it had some good games, the Genesis quickly began outselling it, and by the time 1991 rolled around, the fight was over. But just what the heck went wrong? How could a system that was as capable as the Turbografx and with such a solid library early on fail so spectacularly? Adding even more to the question was the fact that the PC Engine, the Japanese version of the system, had sold so much better against Sega's Mega Drive. Why did it all fall apart in North America so fast? Considering what had happened, my only reasonable conclusion is that the Turbografx 16 was a victim of Sega's vicious advertising campaign, as well as the public's perception that it was just an 8-bit console. Sega's massive advertising campaign was everywhere. TV, magazines, stores. It was hard to miss the catchy "Genesis does what Nintendo don't" slogan, and Sega wasn't afraid to push the fact that their product featured a true 16-bit CPU. By comparison, NEC's Turbografx ads were ineffective and not nearly as prominently displayed. Among my friends, the Turbo had gotten a reputation of being underpowered and lacking the abilities of a true 16-bit machine. Most of them hadn't spent any real time with the device, so their impressions had been molded by the subject being constantly brought up in gaming magazines. I also believe that Keith Courage in Alpha Zones was just about the worst Packin title NEC could have chosen. If you recall, I actually enjoyed the game, but most people saw the screenshots and immediately thought the system was underpowered. That really was the third strike for the Turbo platform and why I feel it tanked so hard in the US. Advertising was a huge problem. The misconception about its technology dogged it the entire time it was on the market, and finally it just had the wrong game selling it. Despite its fortunes and ultimately its failure, I still really enjoyed the Turbografx 16. That first batch of software had loads of potential, and as you know, many more great games were yet to come. If you have never played these, try them out on an emulator and see what they offer. I think many of you will enjoy them quite a bit. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.